And hello, and a very big welcome to you all. As you all know by now, my name is Soraya Lavery. Today we are going to cover how to do your own PR, and I am delighted to have Wright from Rough House here to guide us through our PR, I don't know, what would you say, stories?
Minefield.
Minefield, yes. PR is a little bit of a minefield, and I know that it's an area that a lot of people are very confused about and don't really know how to go about it. So I'm absolutely thrilled to have Anne here. She's an actual powerhouse when it comes to PR. She knows everything there is to know about it. I don't, so I'm going to be asking a lot of questions as we go through this. So as usual, if you have a particular question that is not answered, Anne's contact details will be at the end of this webinar. So just go ahead and email her if you can't get it through to her. She is also on our experts platform, and I think are you a member on our portal as well?
Yes, I am.
Well, then therefore you can look her up on our members directory and you can find her from there as well. So there's lots of different ways for you to catch Anne, and I'm actually very excited about this one because do you know what, PR is one of these ones that kind of people are just like, it's really scary, and they all focus on social media and things like that, and they're forgetting that some of the more traditional ways, I say traditional because it's kind of the older way.
It is traditional.
Exactly, but they forget that actually how powerful they actually are. And I know it's a job in itself to get PR right and to get it into the periodicals or whatever that you want, but it's good to know to have the skills. So I'm very much looking forward to this.
You can do it yourself. That's really what I'm going to be saying, but you have to work on it. You can't just
like everything. It's another hat we have to wear.
Yes,
on this
absolutely.
one. So listen, shall we crack on and just get into it? Are you happy enough?
I am. Yes.
All right, very good. Let's go. Well, we all know him. I wish I had that suntan.
Well, yes. Who can argue with what he's saying? Publicity is critical, basically. Yes. And he and another guy, Bill Gates, who quoted, "If I was down to my last dollar, I'd spend it on public relations." Both of them, obviously, hugely successful and with a really strong belief in the importance of PR. And the thing about PR is that it gives you credibility. If you get coverage in a newspaper, it's somebody else saying that your views and your products are worthwhile, and that's really valuable. It's not you saying I'm great.
Right.
It's a journalist who's got the choice of every company that does what you do saying you're great.
It's a testimonial, really, isn't it? It's a vouch of trust.
It is, and also it gives you greater influence. You know, if you were in a business where you want to influence the local council or you want to influence government for some reason, if you're featured a lot as a thought leader, as they would put it in PR, if you're featured a lot, then actually that gives you greater power and influence. So it's really worth using the power of PR.
And that's actually great here because we always talk about people becoming experts in their area and being the voice that people go to. I mean, even it's just a geographical location, and very few people will go down the PR route because it's kind of out of, people are all digital marketing these days, which again is great, but they're forgetting about the authority side of things, and I think that's where this comes in.
Absolutely, Yes.
Great. Okay, super. Right. So shall we move on then?
Yeah.
To this one? Okay, great.
What I wanted to do first of all is just really run through what the media is. So there's sort of two main kinds of press that you can get. There's news press, and then there's kind of features, effectively. Both of them on newspapers and in broadcast. And news is something that's happened effectively, and features is a more considered in-depth look at what you're doing or at a particular issue which you've got a contribution to. So there's a difference between the two. Both of them really valuable.
Okay.
And obviously there's newspapers, traditional newspapers, all of them online now. There's broadcast radio and television, and there's of course social media, which everybody knows is really important.
Really important, yes.
But it is important also in PR as well as digital marketing, because if you can be featured if journalists basically use social media as a source.
Yes.
So if they're looking for a particular sort of expert in a particular field, or they're looking for somebody to quote on a particular issue, they'll use social media now.
Right. So well, there you are. You see, so it all kind of ties in together.
It does
really,
all tie in together. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, good to know, and good to. I mean, I guess people know. They know about newspapers and things like that. But a lot of the people I know, for instance, are now just kind of reading the Metro or the Evening Standard, and that's kind of it. They're not really going for the broadsheets unless they're in sort of financial services.
Yeah, that's true.
So there's definitely a drop off. But I guess you'll have to match who you're talking to, as to what channels you're actually using to get your audience.
Yes, and that's a lot of what I'll be talking about, actually, that the targeting is the most important, well, one of the most important things.
Sorry
to
to
target
steal
the
your
right
thunder
media.
on that.
You've got it right.
Yay! Wonderful. Okay, so are we ready then? Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay.
So one of the things I think is quite important for people to know who don't know anything about the media is who's who and who does what. And there are probably 5 different jobs.
Okay.
The first one is the editor, and they're the person who is responsible for the overall direction and what is covered in a newspaper. It sounds very obvious, but a newspaper or magazine or TV programme.
So like the CEO, basically. Of the
like
company.
a CEO, yes. But there are other kinds of editors as well. So you'll have a sort of specialist features editor or a sports editor or a news editor. And in television, you also get what's called a VT editor, and they edit the pictures together.
Okay.
So they're very important. They're not responsible for the overall coverage. So there's different types of editor.
Okay.
The reporter is the person who goes out and gets the stories, basically. So they'll be out on the road, or more likely nowadays, hitting the phone or searching on Google, to be perfectly honest.
Are they not just bombarded with stories?
Yes, absolutely overwhelmed with stories.
Yeah.
And we'll talk about how to break through
the gatekeepers, not quite the gatekeepers, but just to get them to listen.
Actually.
Yeah.
So you need to think about what they're looking for, which again we'll cover when you're trying to get coverage. Then if you're looking for broadcast coverage, you have a researcher, and they're basically in the office, hitting the phone, trying to find guests, trying to find interviewees, trying to research stories. And if you ever get phoned up by a researcher, don't think, oh, it's only a researcher, because they really are the gatekeeper.
Wow.
They're the one who's going to be making recommendations to the reporter or the programme producer that this person is a really good guest. They've got really interesting experiences, really interesting comments to make. They've got a completely different take. And they'll be auditioning you. They'll be thinking, how good is this person going to be on TV or radio?
Right. Are they going to be engaging or standing with them?
Exactly.
Like this?
So
they're really very important. And
Yeah.
I would say that if you're getting to a point where a researcher is calling you, you're already an authority.
Yeah.
You know,
you're Googleable by then.
You're
basically.
Googleable.
Yeah.
That's good enough. If Google, because it's hard enough to get up onto the top pages of Google, so we'll take that.
Yeah. So they're really important. A correspondent is going to be an expert in a particular field. So they will be the person who is, health correspondent or environment correspondent or transport correspondent, whatever it is. And so they're a specialist. So if you are in a sector where, you are in a particular like health sector, for example, or education or whatever it might be, you need to get to know who the correspondents are that cover your patch.
Right.
So they're going to be important because they know much more about the subject than a general reporter.
Okay. And is it difficult to find these people, or
No,
is it just all on
really
LinkedIn?
easy.
Or they're listed.
LinkedIn. They're going to be on LinkedIn. They're going to be on Twitter. All you have to do, you've got a newspaper. All you have to do is read the newspaper that you want to get coverage in,
right?
And you'll see who they are,
right?
Because they'll be named. I don't know if everybody knows, but I've just read a book by David Shukman, who's the environment correspondent of BBC News. He's very easy to contact.
Right.
I could tell you his email address now.
He might not appreciate that.
No, he might not. So there's, people, they're easy to find because they want stories as well. And then the final one is the producer. So this is really not for print, but for broadcast. Each programme will have a producer. So the overall person in charge is the editor, but each programme will have its own producer. And so they'll work on that day's coverage, basically. So they're again an important person within the mix.
All right. So any of these people call you, get on it.
Yes,
basically.
exactly. Don't ignore them.
Don't ignore them.
No.
Okay, lovely.
Don't be scared. They're all people.
Well, that's always the thing. I think people kind of get lost with, oh well, somebody's a CEO or they're just people.
Yeah.
Look beyond their job title and be nice to them that way, and you'll get on much better with them.
And one thing actually, a lot of the PRs that I train kind of junior PRs in how to write press releases, and their experience when they ring up journalists is, they can be quite short and quite kind of abrupt. And I think you have to just ignore that. They're not being rude. They're not trying to be rude. But
they're on very tight deadlines.
They're on tight deadlines. Their head is in the space of the story that they're covering at that time. So they don't want somebody to interrupt their train of thought and their thought processes. So that's what we talk about is when the best time is to call, so that you don't kind of annoy them, but you get them when they've just finished their story and they're looking for the next one.
Very good. Well, that's good to know, because how to get through the gatekeeper to the gatekeeper and the timings is a big thing. We cover it in sales quite a lot. I'm very sure there'll be some similarities here.
I'm sure there is,
but good to do it again, you know, or to see how to, I suppose, how to what would you? I've lost the words now, but how to basically use it within this, within PR.
Yeah.
Right, so the media strategy.
Yeah, so you've got to think about it really in advance. So this doesn't have to be horribly complicated. It's not like a kind of 5-year marketing strategy, but you need to have some stuff in place before you launch in.
Right.
And the first thing you need to do is work out where you want coverage. Okay. So you might want coverage in trade papers. They might be absolutely, if your audience is B2B, then trade papers is where you need to be. You might want local coverage. If you're a local business, you might just want the local papers. If you're a bit bigger, or you've got a bigger business, you might want to be in the business pages of the national press, or you might want to be in the national press if you've got a consumer product.
So you need to think about your geography, you need to think about who it is that you're trying to attract and what are they reading, and then go there.
Yeah, exactly. And you think, actually, I'm only going to target maybe 3 or 4 particular outlets and forget the rest. But when you know what those targets are, you need to know them really well. There's no point sending a story about, I don't know, a new design for lipstick to the Financial Times, because they're never going to cover it.
Yeah.
You need to read it and think, what do they cover? What kind of stories do they cover? Do they cover the kind of stories that I might be able to come up with? When do particular things go out? So you might have a monthly trade press, and it might have every week, or every month, it might have a profile of a CEO, or it might have an innovations page, or it might have. So you need to know what kind of stuff they cover. Obviously, who the journalists are who work on it, and what kind of things your competitors are getting in there. So are there stories that your competitors are getting in that you think that could be me? Right, because that's the kind of thing they'll be looking for.
You'll have to get a different spin, because they obviously won't do exactly the same story again. But it's also good to see what they go for by reading what's in the paper.
That's exactly right. And then you need what I call a media toolkit, which the next slide goes into more details. But you just need a series of stuff that you've got ready to go. So when the journalist calls and said, can you do X, Y, Z, you know that you've got the right biography to send them, or the right photo. Okay. So a series of things that you need to have in place.
Okay, it's kind of like your brochures that go along with your PR that they need. Okay, but we're going to talk about that more.
We're going to talk about that on the next slide.
Oh, very exciting.
And then the last thing is you need a list of your key contacts at those target newspapers or magazines or whatever. So you need to know
the decision makers, essentially.
Yeah, and so who you would send things to, what their email addresses are, and just keep a track of your contacts with them, so you know when you've spoken to them.
You obviously, I mean, like normal sales leads, you couldn't put them into your CRM and just to keep a track of when you last sent them stuff and what's going on.
Yeah, exactly that. Yeah.
Rather than it being haphazard, which I know can happen.
Yes, yeah, and there's quite a lot of movement from around, so you need to try and keep track of that. So you've got the latest names.
That's a big one, isn't it? Okay. Here's the media toolkit.
So here's your tool. Oh, are we still recording?
Yes, we are. Yeah.
So here's a toolkit. This is what should be in it. It's not very complicated. You may have all this already because it'll be on your website, but you need to have biographies of all the key people in your business. So anybody that might be interviewed, or that you might be putting up for interview, or that's really, the inventor of a particular thing, you need their biographies. You need to have a history of your company, so just a little potted history of what you've done. You need some case studies. This is what we've done for particular clients. These are all things you should have already, but
this should be your website, basically. As we're currently saying. Yeah.
And you need testimonials, obviously, to prove your credentials. You need high quality photos of.
This is kind of like the bio shots, or
the
bio
shots,
but
products. Also actually what people are crying out for is action photos. So photos of your products in action being used. I have a client who I work with, which is a security firm, and when I started working, they didn't have any photos, and I kept saying, we need photos. This paper's asked us for photos, and this one has. And we got so desperate one day, I just went out and took photos here on my phone of all the kind of security cameras and things in my building. So you really need those, because
but that worked.
It works, yes. Yeah. But actually, they've now gone out and got proper photos done by a proper photographer, which are much nicer than I could ever do. And the other thing increasingly is video. I mean, video, everybody knows video is much more.
But this is going to be short videos.
Yes. Well, I think Yes, but what you actually need to have, as well as, you know, the showcase kind of videos, is a kind of longer sort of rushes that you can send to somebody if they say, have you got any footage of X? The journalist, or particularly in print, particularly in broadcast, the journalist may want to use those in their own piece. So they'll want to have a lot rather than 2 or 3 seconds.
Right.
So if you can keep a stock of kind of what we would call stock images, that can be really, really
so
helpful.
Is that sort of like talking about the products or the services that you've done, or the success stories, or your CRS, or something like that?
So it might be interviews, but it might also be, you know, if you're a biscuit producer, you know, you make bespoke biscuits, you know, you need pictures of you in the kitchen designing the biscuits and making them and baking them and all that kind of stuff.
Okay, so how you do it type of thing.
Yeah, exactly.
How you do it. Okay, good. But that makes sense, because it's much more engaging to watch that type of thing.
Yeah.
You know, and I know I like to watch it because people like to see how things are made.
Yeah,
as an example.
exactly.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So great. Okay. Well, you know, and for those, I know, because videos is a big question that we get asked a lot too, and we haven't covered it yet, but we will. We are going to do a video webinar on how to create your own video on your iPhone. So that's coming up in the next couple of months. I think next month, actually.
A training course that we run as well.
It's a training course that Anne also runs as well. So yes, okay. Well, we might get you involved in that one too. Then. So yeah, because video is a big thing. Because it needs to look nice. If it looks like something your 4-year-old child took on the iPhone, it's not really going to be used in a production company.
And there are actually some really simple tricks that you can put into place which make your videos, take them to the next level.
Yeah, exactly. Good. Okay. Well, then we have that covered then.
Yeah.
So shall we move on?
Yes.
Okay. Let's do that.
So. This is a scary bit.
Depends how you look at it, though, isn't it?
Well, yeah. So how do you build relationships with the media? Because you're far more likely to get coverage if they know you. Yeah. You know, if they have a relationship with you. But then how do you kind of break through that in the first place? So there's 2 kind of steps. So there's a traditional bit, and then there's a social media bit, which we'll come on to. So the first thing is to just cultivate contacts with key journalists. So know who the key journalists are in your field, and just send them some ideas. You know, just a quick email saying, are you interested in ideas for X, Y, Z? Here are a couple. You know, when's a good time to talk? Just start
sort of warming them up, basically.
Warming them up, yeah. But what you need to do is work out when is good times to speak, as I mentioned before. So it might be that it's a weekly paper and it comes out on a Friday, and so it might go to press on the Wednesday. So Thursday is a really good time to call, because they're not on their deadline of Wednesday and they're now thinking about the next week's paper. Okay. So they're looking at the kind of, they're not so busy, they're looking at what they might cover. So it's a really good time to speak to them. Okay. So think about.
And so what about sort of dailies?
Dailies they'll have a meeting first thing in the morning, which might be 8:30, 9 o'clock. Then then the journalists will be off, you know, starting to research their story. The deadlines might be sort of sometime in the afternoon, might be in the evening, which makes it quite tricky. But I just said afternoon is a good time. For a monthly, again, they might have, if it's a consumer, you know, it's like a glossy magazine, they might have a lead time of 4 or 5 months.
Oh, really? So, as long as that?
So the Christmas editions of all the glossy papers will have been put to bed, as they put it, in June or July.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so you really need to know.
It makes sense that that's the case, because it's easier to plan these things out, because then you're just filling it up with advertising, really, aren't you?
Yeah. So, you know, and that's not the case with sort of a monthly trade press, but, you know, you just need to know your own media, and you'll find that some trade press have a thing called forward features, which they publish at the beginning of the year, which is a list of all the kind of special areas they're covering in each edition over the year, and on that normally is a deadline. So it might be, you know, the November edition, and it will say deadline, you know, October, or deadline what date in September. Okay. So then you can if you can go on their website, they're all on their websites. Go on the website, have a look. And then think, actually, I know that this feature that I've got would really fit that month.
So they kind of put that out to say, look, these are what we're going to cover. We're looking for ideas now and what to put in.
Exactly that.
Okay. Well, that makes it just a no-brainer then, doesn't it?
It makes that easy. I mean, not every magazine does it, and it's only trade press. It's not Newspapers wouldn't do that, but if you're wanting trade press because you're B2B, then that's a really good way of getting coverage.
Okay. Oh, I didn't know that. That's really interesting.
So the next one is only pitch to relevant media. So don't pitch your stuff everywhere, because all you'll do is annoy the journalist. The more stuff they get from you which is irrelevant, the more likely they are to ignore the thing that is relevant.
Right.
You know, if you overwhelm them, some companies I know say we must send out a press release once a week. Well, no, don't. If you've got 5 press releases and every one is a load of old rubbish, number 6, which has got something meaningful, they'll just say, oh, they always send rubbish, let's just delete it.
Right.
So only, that's the next one, only send relevant story ideas. So only send it to the people who you know might cover it, and only send proper stories.
Okay, and don't overwhelm them.
No.
Right. Okay.
You know, I used to.
It makes sense because they're human beings at the same time. You know.
And there's a limited amount of time. I mean, I used to work on the local TV planning desk for BBC London, which wasn't then, but it became BBC London. And we would, in those days, because I'm very old, they had if things weren't sent by email, they were sent in the post, and we would have a stack of press releases. I don't know if you can see, but kind of that high. How did I do that?
No,
that high. Every day to go through, and we had about 20 minutes to go through them max.
Wow, so you were just scanning.
So we literally 5 seconds, scan, throw, scan, throw, scan, throw. Oh, that looks interesting. Scan, throw, scan. You know, you just don't have time.
Right. Okay, so that means kind of get your keywords at the top.
Yes,
as well,
exactly.
Because they are going to scan.
Yeah, you've got to be really focused on what the story is, which again we'll talk about.
Okay.
Next.
Okay. Right. So should we move on then?
Yeah.
Okay.
So one thing. So this.
What am I looking at here?
What you're looking at is a few pages from my first ever contacts book. So nowadays, obviously, it would all be online, but I started as a journalist in 1988, and I had a filofax that I would fill with contacts. And if I did a story, you can see there's a section there on meat. So if I did a story to do with meat, I would keep all the names of all the contacts that I spoke to in case I did another story about meat.
Right. This is your little database, basically.
Yes. And so if you can get into the database as the person to speak to on meat, or a seaside GPs, I can't remember what the stories were, but or there I worked on the my local paper, and all the police phone numbers I had. I'm sure they're all out of date now, so I'm not breaching anything.
Don't copy these numbers.
I haven't thought about GDPR with this at all. Anyway,
that's okay.
But if you can get in as the kind of chosen source, then that's really useful.
Right.
One of my friends locally is a paediatrician, and he's a lovely man. And he was on, I can't remember where he was on somewhere on the TV talking about an initiative from the Royal College of Paediatricians, and now he's always on because he comes across really well. He's really nice. So if Sky or BBC think, right, we've got a story about child health, they'll call him.
Okay.
And so once you're in and you do a good job,
you're kind of on their PSL.
Exactly. You're the one that they think, oh, I can't be bothered to try and find anybody else. I'll just find the one we know is good.
Right.
So
if you can get yourself on that type of a list, you are doing extremely well.
Yeah, exactly.
Extremely well.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Okay. Shall we move on then?
Yeah.
Okay.
So the next thing in building media relationships is social media. I mean, you can't ignore it. No. Every journalist is on Twitter.
Yeah.
So follow them all on Twitter, comment on what they say, share their stories. Just, if you can kind of build a bit of a relationship about what they're covering in general, and not before you then say on social media.
It's a very simple thing to do, and that's not really one simple. That I've ever. We did one on social media yesterday, literally, and this wasn't mentioned at all to do this. I mean, it was like pay it forward and share stories of people that you want to get in contact with. But it's a really good idea to do it with the journalists, because you're helping them, and then they'll start to recognise you, really, won't they?
Exactly. And you can have a list on Twitter and just have a list of business journalists or environment journalists or whatever it might be, and then you just go onto the list and think, it only needs to take 5 minutes a day. Yeah. And you're starting to build those relationships. There's also a hashtag and a Twitter address called Journo Request. And if you look at that hashtag, they have basically requests from journalists. And I think this is some Journo requests asking for all sorts of completely random stuff. And you might
did not know about that
stuff. And you can, I think through the @mention one, and I can't remember how you do it because I did it so long ago, but you can sign up and get a daily digest of all the journo requests.
Okay.
So if journalists are looking for something, they'll put that hashtag on. And so the digest from Journal Request comes, and it will say divided into business and health and education and charity. And I look through it every day and think, is there something that one of my clients could comment about? And then you just contact
That's
the journalist.
fantastic, because that kind of does the job for you, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's really,
you're just
it's really
helping
good,
them
and
out.
it's really quick.
Wow.
The other thing is to just sign up to, there's a site called Expert Sources. So journalists use that, and I think Response Source does the same thing, and journalists use that to find an expert in a particular subject. So, I have a journalist I have a client who's a business expert, and so she's on the site, and she's listed as kind of entrepreneur, business founder, whatever. So if a journalist is looking for that, they'll search on Expert Sources, and she gets calls from various people.
And does that work well?
It does. I mean, I think
Is there like tons of people on it though?
There are a lot of people on it, and I think you're much better on it if you have business expert. Frankly,
right?
Everybody's a business expert, so
something special, like a niche.
Yeah, if you're a bit more niche. I mean, I was on it for a year as sort of for various reasons. Well, I worked on lots of royal programs as a kind of expert in royal TV coverage, and so I used to get. I've had a few calls. I've been on. I've had a few interviews about that, and also about hacking. I can't remember why. But so you do get coverage, and I think it's about £120 a year to be an Expert Sources.
Okay.
So it's not an absolute fortune.
It's not a big deal.
No, it's not a massive outlay.
Okay.
So the next one, this is another client of ours, and it's just a demonstration of you need to be easy to find. So try and sort your SEO, and I'm not an expert in SEO at all, but you need to be found if somebody Googles your specialism.
Yeah.
I have a problem because there's an army colonel who's a peace protester in the US with the same name as me. So if you Google Anne Wright, up comes her many arrest warrants and goodness knows what. So I don't practice my French.
You have to add a keyword to that to separate that out.
Exactly. Yeah. So, but if you can do that, and also on your website, make it clear how to contact somebody. A journalist who calls you. So JCQ, they've got on there, this is their front page, they've got Media Centre, so people immediately know they can go to the Media Centre and there's the right contact to speak to.
I also think as well, and I'm not even sure if we have this one, but if you actually put a link with Media Pack and things like that on it, it first of all makes you look more credible, but it also makes you look bigger, because only the bigger companies have that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And also just on the note of the websites, one of the biggest problems with websites these days is you cannot get phone numbers and you cannot get emails.
I know.
It is impossible.
And a journalist just won't bother.
Yeah.
If they see a contact form, that is like, as a journalist, my biggest bugbear is finding just seeing a contact form, because it just goes into some ether.
Yeah.
What you want is, this is the name of the press contact. This is the phone number.
Yeah. So put your contact details. Don't be afraid. You will look. You're going to get calls from people anyway, right? Whether you have it on your website or not. But just make it easy for people to find you. Because a minor gripe. I was booking a restaurant the other day, and I could not see the address of the restaurant on their website. Yeah. Lovely information on their menus, but no address. So guess what? No booking.
No. And that's the same for journalists. They'll have a list of 5 people to talk to about who the story is, whatever the story is, and the first one that they come to that they can actually speak to is the one that gets coverage.
Yeah, think
so
of
if
their
you
deadlines.
make it hard for them, they won't come to you. No. They will never come back.
It's a speed thing for them as well, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay, well, these things are all obvious, but I can see many websites that have not covered this one. Oh yeah, and here's a big one.
Yeah, so this is how to come up with a story. We'll start to talk about that. So for me, stories need to pass what I call the so what test. So if anybody outside of your business would go, so what? It's not a story.
Right.
Basically, it's got to be something that someone else outside, you tell your friends in the pub and they go, oh yeah, wow. It's got to pass the so what test. But the so what test for every newspaper is going to be different. Right. So the right story for the Rich and Twick is not going to be the right story for PR Week, which is my trade paper. So you've got to know your audience and know that you're sending the right story to the right place. And there's also another thing which I call the truth test, which every story has got to cover 5 tests. And so the first one is that it's timely, so that you've got a reason to send it or run it now and not in 6 months' time, because there's an imperative there. And that might be that you are pitching it and linking it to, I don't know, back to school or Easter or Christmas or children in need or something. So it's timely. It's got to be relevant, so i.e. you're sending it to the right place. It's got to be unique, i.e. not every other business is going to come up with this story. And don't be afraid of coverage of something that you've come up with. I did a PR training course for somebody once, and they'd come up with, I can't remember, some amazing innovation. They were like, well, if we put it out there, then everybody's going to copy us. Well, if they copy us, if you're out there, they're going to copy it anyway. If you're out there, you're always going to be the first ones who came up with that. If they might come up with it and do a story, then you
the trade secrets sometimes get a little bit overhand, don't they? So it's got to be unique. There's got to be some kind of tension. So that's TRUT, which is, a little bit of, there's been a problem, we're resolving it, or it might be that there's an issue and you don't agree with it, and you're putting a contrary view in your press release. So that's the kind of tension. And then human interest. I mean, God, thinking about Remembrance Sunday, which was only last weekend, and all the stories that resonate with people are the stories of people. Yes, of course.
And people love the royal wedding because it was about 2 people falling in love. It's a human interest. So got to have that human interest as well.
And actually I think the thing about it is, I think people forget stories are what we thrive on, and we go to the pub and we buy each other pints and stuff like that so that we can tell each other stories, so we can tell each other our day. So, and everything is a story, and he said, she said, and I said, and blah blah blah, and it's all of this, and that's what gets us engaged.
It's absolutely
and so
true.
It's creating a story out of whatever. I mean, we always look at it as sort of we call them SARS, which is not a great acronym, but sort of the situation that you're in, the action that you took, and the positive result that came out of it. So you can turn even the most boring thing into something interesting by creating a story.
Absolutely. And that you say it speaks to the human interest, basically. The thing is, there's 2 types of story. There's ones that are happening anyway, and then there's ones that you create, and I've got 2 more slides which go through the two differences. But the ones that are happening anyway, it's something that you're doing or something you've invented, and therefore you're promoting it. Those that you create, well, I'll go through them next.
Okay, right. Okay, are you in suspense? Let's go then. Okay.
So these are kind of things that might be happening anyway. So human interest, the royal wedding was going to happen, whether or not any of us did anything about it. But if you were the people who did the flowers or made the cake or anything like that, then that's going to be your human interest, and it's also going to be your peg for it. Charities, particularly for local papers, I think if you've got some really good pictures of something that you've done for charity, then that does get coverage. And for example, at the moment, I know the Victoria Foundation I know from Facebook, they've got their annual kind of trek around Vietnam to raise money, and if they've got some great pictures of that might make it into the local paper. And it's not a huge story, but it's a nice story.
People like to fit those feel-good stories as well, don't
they? Jobs and offices is kind of, if you're building a new office and it's going to create loads of jobs, if you're in a sector where your trade paper has a sort of highs and fires page, you might, if you're Virgin and Richard Branson resigns, then that's going to make the front pages of everywhere. But so that's very dependent on your kind of sector, but there may well be stories around,
you often see this guy is joining our office and he's amazing.
Exactly.
That type of thing.
And if you're building a new office and it's incredibly eco-friendly and it's got all these amazing features, then that might make a story. So there's stuff around that. Then obviously products and innovations is obvious. It's I think that's a watch that you have on your skin, God knows how, or not a phone that you have on your skin. If you can come up with...
Is that a real thing?
A real thing, yes.
Wow.
Excuse me. If you've come up with something new, then obviously you're going to try and get coverage for that.
I'm going to have to Google that later. That's pretty amazing.
That's how I got that pictures. And then celebrity endorsement. If you've got a celebrity who is using your products or prepared to put their head above the parapet and say, yeah, this is good, then that's going to get you more coverage than if you've got nobody.
Okay.
Obviously,
aren't they usually sort of like paid campaigns, those celebrity campaigns?
not necessarily. I don't know, and it might be just somebody uses your product and you find out about it, and then you can shout about it. And when I was on my local paper, we used to go everywhere with our MP. Now, you might not think the MP is a celebrity, but I worked on a paper. Everything he did, we covered.
Wow.
So he was, so if he came to your business, then it would get in the local paper. So it's worth thinking laterally about what a celebrity is.
Your politicians, if you can't get Lady Gaga to use your product.
You also need to just think about who your celebrities are, though. I did a training course last week for some PR people, and one of them was from a small charity, and they had Camilla Parker Bowles and Terry Waite as their celebrities, and the board thought this was okay, and obviously there's nothing wrong with either of those, but she said that Camilla can never come to anything because she's obviously so busy, and Terry Waite, a lot of the younger generation have never heard of Terry Waite, so if they're trying to appeal to a younger demographic, he's no good, basically.
Right.
So no offense.
So somebody
that you're, but it's got to.
Somebody your target audience looks up to, essentially, that they're listening to.
Exactly that.
It has to be relevant to them.
Yes, exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
So then these are ones that you kind of create yourself, really. So stats and surveys, so easy. If you've got a database, send out a survey on SurveyMonkey to all your clients, asking them some key questions. As long as you've got
3% respond type of thing.
As long as you've got a reasonable response, which says something interesting, then put it out. And it does. They do have to be interesting stats. So I've had a press release that I saw, which was about people using eco-friendly household products.
Okay.
And at the very top, it said, 85% of people think that they should use eco-friendly washing up liquid and stuff. And right at the very bottom, it said only 25% of people did. Well, it's not surprising people think that you should use eco-friendly products. That's not going to make a story. But the fact that 85% do think it, and only a quarter of them do it, suddenly that's a story.
Right.
And so you've got to think about how you
Was
use
that their
your
story
stats.
then?
Well, they didn't get any coverage because they didn't send it out. And so it would have been a story if they'd done what I said. And if you're using stats, just make them user friendly. So not 75.9%. Nearly
easy to read.
Nearly 80%, 7 out of 10, a quarter, those kind of things.
Right,
so
things that are easy to understand.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
Then awards, obviously, it's not going to get huge coverage, but you might get coverage in the trade press, you might get coverage in a local paper, so that's worth getting.
It's good for that sort of one is also very good for your social media and going on your website.
Exactly, good for social media, good for credibility, all those things. If you can invite a journalist to use your product or come and look round your business, or you generally will get a good press. And nowadays, I think journalists are a bit more time poor than they were, but it's just worth having a go. If you've got something which would be potentially really interesting trip or journey or visit, then it is worth.
Yeah, I mean, we see this working very well for restaurants and sort of theatres and obviously those kind of critics and stuff like that, or going to see a band or that type of thing.
Trying out a new face cream or whatever it might be.
Exactly. Yeah. So we do see that works very, very well, and the journalist is usually happy, particularly in the restaurant, if they just get a nice meal.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, the one caveat on that is when I was on my local paper, they'd introduced a new motorbike test. And I can't ride a motorbike, and they sent me on this trip to try and have a motorbike lesson and then pass the test, and I fell off.
That's a good story, though.
Well, it was a really good story, but then they were on the phone to the editor saying she can't include that, and the editor saying, well, it happened and she can't lie because she didn't pass, did she?
That's okay, because not everybody should get their motorbike lesson.
I know. I mean, we had to word it quite carefully so it didn't look like it was their fault, basically.
Right. Okay.
So anyway, those kind of things will get you quite a lot of coverage. pegs. I don't know why that picture's there. That's my son. But
because you like it.
well, yeah, I know, but it's not relevant at all. So the peg is what I mentioned earlier. They're linking your story to a reason to run it now.
Okay.
Finding a peg. So a news editor will say to a journalist, "What's the peg?"
Right. Well, maybe it was 40 degrees in London and your son was cooling down in a fountain, which is always quite fun to watch.
Yeah. So, the peg might be, it's coming to Christmas. I said all of those things earlier. So just try and find a peg and it's more likely you'll get coverage.
Okay.
Lists, journalists, really easy for journalists to...
These are one of the most common blog things we see, top 10 tips, top 5 tips, to the point where I actually go, oh, no.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
But if a journalist is looking for something, a quick, easy hit, then a list is a good thing to come up with. And then expert comment, and that's another word for that is kind of newsjacking. So there's a story in the press, and you've got a different perspective or something you can add that is relevant and interesting.
These are the comments and things like that.
Yeah, that takes the story on, and in journalistic jargon, then that's a good way of getting your name in. And actually the whole credibility thing is boosted by even just one sentence in a story about something means that you're being quoted as a credible person, expert on that subject.
But you see that in press releases all the time, different quotes from different people, on that subject.
Yeah.
Okay, so do it, basically. So, but these are the things, I guess the point is, these are easy things that if you just sit down for half an hour, you'll come up with loads of stuff that you can do like this.
Yeah, I mean, yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Yes.
Great. Okay, so let's move on.
So once you've got your story and you've got your press kit ready and you've got your strategy and you know where you're sending things, how do you do it, basically?
Right. Crunch time.
So I'm not going to talk about social media because that's a whole different ball game. But two key things are: do you send it out as what we'd call a pitch, or do you send a press release? So the difference between those is that a press release, you send it to everyone, or at least all the people who might be interested. So you might then get coverage in 5 papers, which can be a really good thing. A pitch is when you have an idea which you think might be a good feature specifically for a particular outlet.
Okay, that's very targeted now.
And that's very, very targeted. And then you then send that to one person. So not as a press release, just as an email specifically to them.
So would it be right in saying that if you're going to go down the pitch road, that you would need to know those journalists quite well?
Well, not necessarily, but you need to, not necessarily in person, but you need to know
there has to be that trust factor has to be there.
Yeah, but you need to know that they would be receptive, that they are the right person, and they have covered that kind of stuff in the past.
Okay, right. So again, you need to know your
You need to know your
Okay.
Yeah. So the first thing is to talk about a press release and what you need to do if you're going to write a press release. So the first thing, the most important thing, is your headline and introduction, because most press releases, all press releases now are going to be sent by email. If you haven't got a good headline, i.e. a subject line, it's just going to get deleted. So the worst kind of subject line would be press release, new product launched, because you wouldn't have no idea what it is. Right,
so you need to be very specific as to what it is.
Yeah, so what you need to do is have the most active, interesting words at the beginning of your headline. Because if you have your company name, unless you're Virgin or Sainsbury's or something, most people won't have heard of you. So you're not important. The story is what's important. So get the active words at the beginning.
This is the sort of like the lose 10 pounds, 1 tablet a day, that type of thing.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So not quite so brash, but you know.
No, but yes, exactly. So this what is happening is the important thing, not who it's happening to. So get that in your headline. You don't need to say press release and then, because the journalist knows it's a press release. And then your introduction has to kind of back that up with, again, the most interesting stuff, what a journalist would call the top line. So every time I pitch a story to an editor, they would always just say, what's the top line? And the top line is the most interesting thing. And you can't bury the top line in the bottom. It's got to be in the
introduction. Because they're scanning it as well, right? They're not reading it, so
no.
It's not
they're not even scanning the whole thing. They'll read the intro. If they can't see the story there, they'll just ditch it if it's not interesting.
Right. So vital to get this bit right.
Yeah, really vital. And what you don't want to be doing is starting off with, Startup Richmond in.
So no fluff.
No, Startup Richmond linking up with Richmond Business School has announced that.
Right, that's too long.
Boring. I would not read that.
Okay.
Because I don't care about Startup Richmond, no offence, or Richmond Business School. What I care is what you're doing.
Right.
So turn that around and have what you're doing, and then have the Richmond Business School and Startup Richmond at the end of the sentence.
Right. Okay.
So get to and this is so important now with smartphones, because all you see is the first kind of few lines of, of an email. So
it's kind of like going back to the original Twitter when it was 140 characters.
Yeah, it's exactly that. Yeah.
Right.
So those are most important. What your headline is getting somebody to read your intro is getting somebody to read on.
Right.
So if they're no good, that's it, you're dead, basically.
Okay.
Then you need to include your key facts, and your proof of the point that you're making. So it might be, Rough House works with a whole range of not-for-profits and charities.
Right. Okay.
I can say that. What's my proof? Well, here's our client list,
right.
And in that is probably 90 different charities and not-for-profits. So that's
right.
my proof point. And then you've got the who, what, where, when, and why, the key questions that a journalist is going to ask about everything. So try and get those facts in the first 2 or 3 paragraphs, basically.
So you just got to lay it out in a very simple way.
Yeah. And there's a format. So a journalist will work on a particular form. They understand a particular format. So if you deviate from headline, date, intro, key facts, and they'll be going, oh, this doesn't make sense. They don't know what they're doing, and again they'll ditch it. So
okay. So it's very important you follow the format.
Yeah, basically. Then after there's 2 or 3 paragraphs with all the who, what, where, when, and why, you need some quotes. So you need quotes from, the CEO or the inventor of something, and then if possible from customers or partners or the key players, and they need to be quotes that will back up the story, not add to the story. So it might be, the reason we're so delighted about this is because one of our core missions is to do X, Y, Z, rather than we are doing this.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yes, it does, yeah.
And don't ever quote anybody who's not prepared to be interviewed, because I can't remember ever taking a quote from a press release. I always would want to speak to somebody and talk to them myself.
Oh, okay.
So don't, you need your quotes to be good, but just you need to know that if you're quoting a customer, they're happy to be phoned up.
Okay.
Basically.
Get that right.
Yeah.
That's important.
And then the next thing is to have an appendix, and all the kind of fluff, guff goes in the appendix. So all your contact details, your interview opportunities, i.e. these people are available for interview, what photos you've got available, is there filming, have you got footage, and your boilerplate, and your boilerplate is your history of your company. Basically all that goes in the appendix. And then don't forget to use keywords, because you're obviously going to be putting it online, so you want it to be found. And
so your press release is going online. I thought you just sent it directly to journalists.
Well, you will, but you'll also tweet it out. You'll put it on press release distribution sites. You'll put it on your website. All those things.
Oh.
So then that helps your SEO. And then hyperlinks again for the same reason, but keep the hyperlinks in the appendix, not in the body of the email.
Right, we've been doing a lot of this wrong.
Sorry.
Oh no, good to know, right? You can't fix it if you don't know.
No.
Okay.
So here's a little bit more about the format. So what you want is for your press release to be no more than 2 pages, because
A4 pages.
A4 pages, yeah. It's just going to get boring. Basically, you've got too much info, so no more than two pages. Really cleanly laid out with a nice clean font. So probably not Times New Roman, something which is clear.
Like what?
Like Arial or
okay.
Trebuchet or something, something very common and simple, with 1.5 line spacing, so there's lots of white space around, so it's easy to read. If you've got something which is really bunched up with long paragraphs, then it's just quite difficult for people to read it. So you're just trying to make it as easy as possible. Then written in the third person, so written they, not we. Mm-hmm. Obviously grammatical, that goes without saying, no spelling mistakes, and clear, simple language. So you don't want to stuff it with jargon, and you don't want lots of acronyms in it.
Yeah, nobody understands those.
No, and if you've got an acronym particularly in your headline, absolute no. And if you've got acronyms, just try and explain what they are. But just strip out the jargon. Imagine you're talking to somebody, and that's how you want it to come across. And then you need to have on it the release date, which may be just immediate, or it might have an embargo. So just to explain what an embargo is, if there's a reason why a story can't run until at a certain time, then you would put an embargo on it. For example, I used to work as a reporter at the Old Bailey, as a court reporter, and there'd be a long, quite high profile trial, and we would be doing, while we were covering the trial, also what you would describe as backgrounders. So, background information about the accused and the crime and all that kind of stuff. None of that could be released until the verdict. Yeah. So it would all be, the newspapers would have it ready to go, but it would all be under embargo. So that's quite an extreme example, but
newspapers actually keep embargoes.
They do, yes. Certainly in a court case they would, but yes, they do.
Okay.
Because actually, if you breach an embargo, then they're not going to come to you next time with the story. So it's in people's interest, and normally there's a good reason for it. You wouldn't just slap an embargo on for nothing. You do it for a good reason.
Okay, all right. Yeah. I hadn't heard of an embargo before, but it makes absolute sense.
So a few tips on writing. Imagine you're explaining your story to your friend. That's your introduction, basically. I think I've probably covered some of these already. Don't have long titles in your intro because it slows down people's understanding of what the story is.
So what, like 10 words type of thing? Or?
Yeah, no, just a normal, like a 2-line sentence for your introduction. But the whole Richmond Business School linking up with Startup Richmond, all that slows down somebody's understanding. So if you've got that in, what you want to do is get across the story rather than the key players.
The interesting bit.
Yeah, exactly. Avoid subclauses, so that if you find you're getting lots of commas in your sentence, just as my old journalism tutor taught me, throw full stops at it and divide it into 2 sentences, because it makes understanding much, much easier. People get lost in long sentences and they don't know what's going on, and they have to keep going back to the beginning to see where it's going. So just try and keep your sentences fairly short.
Okay.
The next thing is write in an inverted pyramid with the important facts first. Again, this is a journalistic thing, that if we were always taught that the sub-editor would chop our stories from the bottom up, so they'd just chop the last sentence off and the last sentence to make it shorter. And it's the same thing. A journalist is going to read your press release, they're going to keep reading until they get a bit bored, and then they'll stop.
Right.
So if your most important thing is in the bottom, then they're going to miss that.
Right.
So I'll give you an example. I've got a press release that I use as an example, which is about a competition for a hotel chain that had a 5-year anniversary, and they ran a competition for people to get a free stay in a hotel. And all these nice facts about the hotels, and then right in the end was get people to send in a photo of them on holiday when they were 5. Now, that for me is the thing that would make that go viral, because you've got people on social media putting in photos of people of them when they were 5. That should have been in the introduction,
right?
Because that takes that story.
So they kind of missed how to frame it.
Yeah, exactly. So then again, each paragraph should be 1 sentence. Keep them fairly short. This is more of a format thing: 3 or 4 sentences before your first quote, and read your story aloud, because that's when you find the mistakes. And even better, get somebody else to read it. To get somebody else to read it aloud, because you know what you meant to say.
That's what your brain reads, but that's not necessarily what's there.
Exactly. So that will find mistakes. It will also find if stuff is quite hard to read aloud, it's going to be hard for somebody to read on the page.
Right.
So that finds out all the little sentences which are a bit tricky or a bit slightly wrongly constructed.
Yeah. That's a really good tip. We do that when we're writing sort of articles and blogs, read them out loud and then get somebody else to do it, because you'd be amazed what you missed.
Yeah, exactly. It's a sub-editing thing. So that's some writing tips. And I think next I've got an example of a press release.
Okay.
Yes. This is one I wrote for a client who's a security firm. So it's about an innovation they come up with. So
is this the one that you took all the pictures for?
I don't know actually. Might have been. But so I don't mention. You'll see I don't mention their name until the end of the first sentence.
Right.
I've got big data, which is quite a sexy expression in the first few words. So it's just, and it's very, you can see the layout, it's very clean and clear, wide spacing.
Yeah.
So it's just.
And that's relatively short. That, I mean, I know that's just the top section.
It goes on a bit longer, but it's about a page. Actually, I think it was sent when we were just they were relaunching themselves, but we just had to find a story, because them relaunching was.
And how well did this one do?
It got some coverage in specialist press.
Okay, but that's what they were aiming for.
Yes,
right?
exactly. Yeah.
So,
they're not aiming
it worked.
They're not aiming for the Rich and Twig.
Okay.
No.
Okay. Good.
So, and then read about how to send it. So send it in the body of the email. Don't send it as an attachment because people haven't got time to open it. So in the body, don't have a nice little, dear Anne, I thought you might be interested in this really interesting story. Because if you do that, they probably won't read on. If they're just looking on their phone in the first 3 lines, they won't actually get to the press release. So unless you know somebody really well, and then it's like, I've got this, I thought you'd be interested, you've got a relationship with them, just get straight in. Subject line we've already said. Specific individuals, if you can, just send it to a specific person who you know might be interested, not to the press at X or the one show at.
Right.
So that might, and certainly with the BBC, it's really easy to find out people's email addresses because it's first names dot second name at bbc.co.uk. So
most companies follow a very similar format,
so you can guess, and you can if you look on Twitter, on journalists on Twitter, often they'll have their email address on Twitter as well, so that you can find them that way. If you're sending it to a lot of people at once, do it as blind copy, because what you don't want is everybody to know who else has got it.
Right.
And then add it to your website, put it on social media, put it on press release sites. So there are some distribution sites which distribute press releases kind of widely, and they don't actually really get any coverage, but what they do is help your SEO.
Okay.
And so it's worth
really.
Yeah, it's worth doing it just for the sake of it, because it doesn't take any time and it's there.
Okay.
Basically.
All right. So the pitches then.
Yeah, pitches. So a pitch is if you have got an exclusive story to offer to somebody that is a really good fit for their magazine or newspaper or whatever, and you send it in the first person, so you're talking as I.
Okay. So again, generally you shouldn't hopefully know them, or they know of you at this point.
You've rung them up and had a chat on a time when they're not busy, and they're receptive to ideas, and you might have built up a relationship on social media. So you would then send it in the first person, and you would say, I was just reading, and I know you cover this area quite extensively, or I think this would be a really good idea for your X column in the magazine, and so why it's the right idea. You send it to one journalist, and keep it short. So a summary of your idea, a little bit about your credentials, and then why it's right for them. So again, I've got an example on the next slide of one that I sent out for my security client.
Okay.
So this was to Property Week, and so this was one that came out of the Ford Features, because they had a property management edition of Property Week covering property management, which is what my security expert is a specialist in. So I'm asking, are they interested? This is his credentials, and then I had about 4 ideas that I sent that I thought, and I can't remember which one they used, but they definitely used it because it's quite short, it's quite friendly, it's got his credentials, this is who we work for, all those kind of things, and it's for a specific place.
Okay, so you've said, look, this guy's an expert. Here's 3 or 4 ideas that we can cover. Pick one.
Yeah,
basically. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
And so you were mentioning earlier about sort of calling these guys up on the phone. How do you approach the phone call? Is it just straight in again, or because you know that they're time precious, so
the first thing you might do is this a good time? If not, I can ring back. So you're conscious, and then you would say, just wanted to find out if you're open to ideas. Do you ever have contributions from external contributors? So some magazines never do. This is really trade press, but some will never have a feature from somebody else who's written it. But this is what we were pitching. If they do, then can I send you some ideas? And then
very simple, very short, and very simple.
Yeah. So don't waffle on. Be respectful of the fact that journalists are normally fairly busy, but just kind of simple. This is my pitch. This is why we're right for you.
Okay. All right, very straight to the point, essentially.
And for a lot of magazines, this is free. They haven't got to employ somebody to write these because you're doing it for free.
Right. So as long as you're good at writing, they don't mind.
Yeah, exactly.
Nothing worse than having to rewrite somebody else's story.
No, and sometimes they can be a bit fussy, but it's fine. And they'll say we want this many words and we want it written in this way, or this particular format, but that's fine.
Okay. You get on with it, basically. Yeah. Okay.
Or you employ somebody to do it for you. Which is what Jason did.
Right, somebody with experience in that area.
Yeah. Okay. But actually, you can do it yourself.
Right.
You know your subject, don't you? So.
Yeah, but not necessarily a good writer on it, you know.
No, that's true. Yeah.
Well, I guess that's where it comes to get somebody else to proofread it for you, because they'll tell you if it's rubbish. Hopefully they'll tell you if it's rubbish.
You have to say, let's be honest about this.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Okay, let's move on then.
Yeah. So we're
here.
There's a list of our clients.
Okay. Here's just a few.
Yeah, so
okay, so you've got some very big clients on here.
Yeah. We have most of our clients. We do some work with some small businesses, but most of our clients tend to be not-for-profits and charities. Like, I don't know.
Well, they still do a lot of PR, don't they? I mean, it's still quite a part of their marketing strategy.
Yeah, I mean, the core of what we do is less PR than we're a media consultancy. So we don't really we do a little bit of PR for small businesses, but what we mainly do is training.
Okay.
So we train people how to deal with the media. So I train on our behalf, but I also train on behalf of the Public Relations Consultants Association, and I also train on behalf of the Press Association, which is the sort of main news agency in the UK. So we do training courses.
Okay.
In a whole range of things.
Well, and that's a great thing to do, because that, I mean, just with what you've covered so far, it's absolutely fantastic, and it's very clear. This is what you need to do. Just follow these steps, and you'll get there.
Yeah.
Which is very refreshing as well, instead of going halfway around a circle. You know? So it's good. But it's good to see. So basically, a lot of these guys, they're sort of like internal, PR people that you're.
Yes. Assisting. Yeah. Most of the people we deal with.
How funny that you're doing that with the BBC. You think that they'd be an expert in that?
Well, no. See, the BBC is because I work as a freelancer. I used to work. I was 14 years at the BBC, so I sometimes go back and work for them as a freelance.
Okay.
But by what the very badly described service company, because I have a company, so we work. They provide, and we provide me to them. So,
okay.
So that's why they're there.
A very good list here. Yeah. Very good.
And there's a few numbers about us. So we were founded in 1998. We've got a team of people who are basically journalists, communications expert. We have a lot of experience in the sector.
I love when people do this. I've got 400 years experience. My God, you're old.
I know, really old. We were just, I think the reason we know what we're talking about in PR is we come at it from the other side. So we come at it from the journalist side.
Right, so you know what it's like sitting in their chair.
So a lot of people in sort of PR come from a marketing, so it's more from sales to marketing to PR. Right. And they have no idea really, though I shouldn't say that about our clients, but they don't have the news perspective, and they don't know how a newsroom works.
But this would be very common in a lot of different industries. To me, this makes perfect sense.
Yeah. So now, particularly when we do media training, this is our credibility that we've all worked at the BBC, at Sky, ITV, Channel 4, and have huge amounts of journalistic experience.
You have your credibility, and based on the client list that you had in the previous one, it's backed up by that.
Well, yeah.
Okay. Well, very good. Super. Good to see that we're dealing with professionals here.
And then it's just going back to what you should do. The last thing is to have a strategy. So don't just randomly scattergun all over the place and think, I must send out a press release on that. And let's do it.
But you kind of plan this like a year in advance or a month or two in advance or something like that.
You can. Yes, you can. I mean, I've one of my clients. I do her publicity basically for her business. It's a small business, and we've planned a marketing strategy, which every month we've got a series of tips videos which we produced, and we're releasing one a month on different subjects. And around that, we're all the newsletter and all the social media will match those topics. But then I will also every month be trying to pitch a story to somewhere, a business magazine or online business website related to that. So if you've got a strategy, actually it makes it easier, because you're not, oh my God, what are we going to do now?
Right.
We've got this plan.
Look, we say this to you all the time. You should have your strategy at least a year in advance.
Yeah.
You only concentrate on what you're doing in the next month, but know where it's leading to, and get through that list. And it should include PR. And based on what you said, I'm very sold on this now, because it's not an area. I mean, people always talk about PR, but it seems to me that people just go, that's just so hard.
Yeah.
But you've just explained it very well. It's not really that hard. It just takes time. And,
exactly.
And a lot of the things, like for instance, writing a blog or an an article, well, there you are. You have your paper basically done.
Yeah,
You can use that. You can comment on it. So a lot of the marketing stuff, it ties in with this. It's not like you have a completely different thing to do for digital media, completely different thing to do for PR, a completely different thing to do, whatever else you're doing.
You're repurposing. Your blog can also be your press release, can be an article, it can be a series of tweets, it can be all sorts of stuff. So
exactly.
It's
so that's a key point as well, because I think a lot of people are going, oh man, the amount of content I have to create.
Yeah.
Well, no, you don't actually. You just need to have a few really good ones and then keep referring back to it.
And actually, the tips things we videoed, we've done a year's worth. 1 a month, so that's 12. We film them in half a day. There you are. And they're really easy to produce because they're all produced on the same format, top and tail, which is at the beginning, bit at the end, and that's it. So if you a little bit of investment, and you could probably with your smartphone course film them yourself.
Well, there you are.
With with a bit of investment and the right tools, then you can do wonders. Basically.
Yeah, it's not that expensive to do anymore. It's just time and a bit of thinking.
It's time and just knowing how to do it really.
Okay.
So have a strategy. Only target specific key media. Just have 2 or 3 outlets that you want to get in contact, and that will help you to build relationships with them. Where with the security team, I can say, well, I know you covered this thing. You go, we had that feature in February. Do you want another one? We've got a couple of other ideas. And they, that's great. It went down really well. X, Y, Z. So key media, build relationships with them, and only send good stories. Don't send something which is blatantly a puff.
Right.
So that press release that I had on the slides earlier was really just a puff, because we were repositioning the company as a prop.
But it still worked.
Tech. Yeah, but because we'd found a story to hook it onto, basically. Right. But it was really just to get their name out there.
Right.
So try.
But that's what most of this is, really,
of course it is. Yeah. So try and avoid something that's blatantly, this is just a great product,
Right. Okay.
Unless you want to get coverage, it's always a caveat. In the Christmas gift guide or something like that,
Okay.
Those kind of things.
All right. So basically, use your head on these things.
Yeah.
If you wouldn't want to read it, don't send it out.
No, that's true.
Yeah. Okay, super. And then this is just you.
Yeah.
Okay.
This is just basically what we do. So we do 3 things. We do training in media training, crisis comms, how to do PR, smartphone video. We do consultancy, which that might be a crisis strategy, might be a PR strategy. Did one of those for a client last year. You might do message development, which is a very PR thing about developing messages for your company. And we do a bit of publicity and promotion. And then we do production, so that's videos, podcasts, and content. Great.
So tons of stuff there,
which
is and with 400 years of experience, it's good to know. Super. So look, there you have it. I think that was an absolutely amazing webinar. If you want to get in contact with Anne, if you have more questions, or if you want to, partake in any of the wonderful trainings that she has, please do get in touch with her. All of the contact details are there. If you have any other questions or anything else that you need, don't hesitate to get in touch with us, and we are always here to help, as you well know. So Anne, thank you so much for that. It was absolutely fantastic. Yes, I've enjoyed it. It was really good. And I hope you guys did too. Do keep in mind all the other installments that we have. We have now quite a bank of training on the portal. There's over 200 training programs, and it's even on some of the things that you were talking about there. We already have it. We already have it there for you. So go and do them. Essentially, it's all there to help you. I guess for us, it's time to sign off, and thank you all very much for watching, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you. Bye.
Take care. Thanks. Bye.